This episode is part of a long series exploring how some evangelicals tied themselves to the Republican Party in the 1970s and 80s. This one is going to refer a lot to my previous work this season, including The New Right, Barry Goldwater, Boardroom Jacobins, and those on libertarianism, taxes, Tim and Beverly LaHaye. The stuff we talk about today can stand on its own, but will make a lot more sense in the context of the season. Also, patrons of the show can hear my full interview with my guest today through your normal channels. If you'd rather hear a raw version of this interview, I had to cut a lot out, and it's good stuff. Also, the interview I did for this one happened before Charlie Kirk's death in September of 2025, so we may still refer to him as if he's alive. This is the Council for National Policy. Hey Nick, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty well. Just had a nice little watercolor night. It's a beautiful night out here in Jackson, Wyoming, and we're bundled up. Fall is setting in.
It is August, but it gets cold here.
Yeah.
Pretty early.
Yeah, we can sense it.
Next to the street, we're looking up at the stars. Are you good at constellations?
No, when I was on a date once though, I pretended, and I was like, "Oh, you see that one right there, and that over to here, and that's a horse. That's actually, you've seen Orion, his belt. That's his horse over there." And I pointed it out to her. She believed me, and I was totally making stuff up.
And she never believed you again.
Never
about
again.
anything.
Sorry about that. Yeah. She's probably telling other people about that stuff. We can see a lot of them here, actually, even though there's light pollution and stuff, and we can still see a fair amount of stars.
I'm always amazed when I look up at the stars. It's such a great reminder, especially when we're camping in the backcountry and you see them all kind of spread out in front of you and there's no light pollution. Yeah. I'm just amazed at how kind of small we are. And it's something we talk about, Nick and I talk about every now and then, is the speed at which the Earth rotates.
Yeah, you think you're standing at a fixed position, but really we're just hurling around stuff. And stuff is hurling around us, and then we're hurling around the sun, and then our galaxy is hurling around that. It's like, yeah, crazy.
A lot of hurling going
on. Yeah, if you really think about it, we're just moving at a colossal speed, but in this moment, it feels still.
It's hard to comprehend something like that, something that big, something that far away. And so I think my temptation, especially, is to forget that the stars are there and to not look up.
Sure.
And to not contemplate the bigness of a subject that is overwhelming. But today on the Truce Podcast, we're looking up at the stars. We're talking about a constellation, but not the balls of fire that are above us and the satellites that are spinning around in the moon. We're talking about a concept that is kind of a lot, but it's very important and it's very relevant to our lives.
And when you see the bigger picture and you see the lines that connect them together, you start to get an idea of something much larger.
Yeah, like a constellation. You see an individual star and it's, magnificent on its own, but then you can start to connect the dots and see how they interact.
And unlike Orion's horse, this is real.
Is Orion's? Oh, yeah.
Because I made it up.
You made it up.
You already forgot.
I did. I remember it. We're talking about the role of dark money in the church and how people we've studied this season built this foundation for the far right through a secret organization. You're listening to the show that uses journalistic tools to look inside the Christian church. We press pause on the culture wars in order to explore how we got here and how we can do better. I'm Chris Staron.
I'm Nick Staron.
And this is Truce. I'm honored to welcome our guide to the celestial bodies in this episode.
My name is Ann Nelson. I am a research scholar at Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs and the author of Shadow Network, Media, Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right, as well as 2 books about resistance movements in Germany and France that included Christians during the Nazi period.
Let's rewind to 1964. When Barry Goldwater won the Republican nomination for president and welcomed the extreme right into the mainstream of the GOP.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
Remember this? 3 people who went on to shape the religious right worked on the Goldwater campaign. Barry Goldwater lost. These guys, Morton Blackwell, Richard Viguerie, and Paul Weyrich, were only low-level workers, but took this loss to heart. In her book, Anne points to 3 things that they learned.
Number 1, dispense with the need to be right. Number 2, emphasize the recruitment and training of activists. Number 3, make sure political technology is integrated in the organization framework.
For our trio, it was all about winning, getting their kind of people into power by any means. Look for those three principles as we continue today.
One thing that they observed was the Democrats were better at building coalitions. So they would walk into a room in Washington, D.C. and see that the civil rights leaders and the feminists and the fair housing people and the trade unions were starting to work together,
coordinating their various agendas. These dudes who would become the new right thought, if the Democrats can do it, why can't we? The new right advocated for a different kind of government. Two of them, Paul Weyrich and Howard Phillips, were followers of R.J. Rushdoony's Christian Reconstruction, which sought to make Old Testament law the legal precedent for the U.S., undermine public education, embrace a radical libertarianism akin to feudalism, enforce a kind of theocracy. They learned from the Democrats, yes, but also Phyllis Schlafly. Let's go back outside. Here's where the astronomy metaphor comes in handy. They didn't just create one bright spot organization, one star in the sky. They created a constellation, a series of organizations that would each focus on just a few issues or maybe serve a single function. But when you draw the lines between them, you see the pattern. They take on a new shape, like 7 stars that make up the Big Dipper. Instead of one nonprofit trying to do it all, they put together a constellation of orgs that, together, became more than their individual parts. For example,
you have some groups that are all about the donor base.
Hobnobbing, getting money.
Some of them are about mobilizing and recruiting activists.
A few train volunteers, others gather information.
And they all report to each other, so there's a very high level of coordination.
Why? Why not just have one organization do it all instead of a constellation? Because if one of your planets collapses and becomes a black hole, it doesn't take down the entire operation. You've still got all the others. Instead of stars and planets, though, these guys created nonprofits, PACs, and think tanks, doing their thing in concert with all the others. The New Right had this blueprint, borrowed from Democrats. Basically, build a constellation. But how to use it? Their training ground was an event from earlier this season, the fundamentalist takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention.
The takeover of the Southern Baptist Convention was a reaction to the liberalization of the Southern Baptist Church in the 1960s and 70s, along with all of the other Protestant denominations, who were influenced by the civil rights movement and just ideas that religion shouldn't be as rigid as it had been in the past and should pay more attention to social movements. So there were several leaders, Paul Pressler and Paige Patterson particularly, who decided that they were going to push back in the Southern Baptist Convention. And they organized a real political dirty tricks campaign that would put Richard Nixon to shame.
Using the rules of the convention to coordinate a takeover of the denomination. They started by getting one of their people elected to the presidency.
Vote for me!
That guy then installed leaders in the committees.
And then those people installed other true believers, until our kind of people filled all of the offices. Sneaky, right?
By carefully planning their moves, a minority of fundamentalists seized control of the entire denomination.
Aha!
This really is the story of hostile takeovers, cleaning house, ridding organizations of people who don't follow their line. Instead of, seeking different opinions through democracy, they used existing systems to get their people in power and destroy anyone who wasn't with them. These tactics became crucial to the main subject of our episode, the Death Star of sorts, the Council for National Policy.
Paige Patterson and Paul Pressler,
the two guys who organized the takeover of the SBC,
were early and perhaps founding members of the Council for National Policy. And they brought these tactics along with them.
Any big star like the Council for National Policy is going to need a lot of fuel, tons of money to keep it going. But where could they get that kind of fuel? Why not the oil and gas industries? Kind of an easy fit, because many of the founders of the CNP were from what Anne called the American petrostates.
Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, where the oil interests and other fossil fuel industries are incredibly powerful. And there's also a very high concentration of Southern Baptists.
Maybe you're seeing the connections already. The constellation's starting to form. The SBC, the petroleum industry, oil has long financed evangelical, fundamentalists, or extremist ideas. Though not all evangelicals are extremists. I'm an evangelical. But here are some examples of how it worked. The National Association of Evangelicals was started with a grant from J. Howard Pugh of Sun Oil, as were the ministries of Billy Graham, including Christianity Today, which has fed ads to this podcast. Then there was Nelson Bunker Hunt, a paranoid oil magnate who was chairman of the Texas Bible Society. He also backed Bill Bright's Campus Crusade for Christ International, and the Jesus Film, and also the John Birch Society. Oil, oil, oil. Okay, so why would it be helpful for the petroleum industry to grab onto Christians? Because they needed a constituency.
Well, as an old-style journalist, I subscribe to Follow the Money. And there have been vast amounts of money tied up in the American oil industry. And even Nixon,
a Republican president,
understood that the environmental crisis was on the horizon and founded the Environmental Protection Agency under his administration. And from the beginning, the oil industry saw this as problematic because regulations that favored the environment cut into their profits. And ultimately, the American and global dependence on fossil fuels was a vast profit center for them. And everything that was happening with alternative energy and climate and environmental protections worked against their profits. The problem was that it was hard for these oil billionaires to create a political platform that said Americans should choke on their air and be poisoned by their water in order to fatten our profits. They had to find a way to promote their political interests with different language.
Industry had already targeted religious people for years through groups like Spiritual Mobilization, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Volcker Fund, and on and on. In the name of combating communism and socialism, they pushed public Christianity mixed with the libertarian views of people like Friedrich Hayek.
And that's where they came upon the religious right. And of course, in the beginning, it was not the religious right. It was just Christian fundamentalists and evangelicals who were not frequent voters. Now, they did not go to these people and say, you have to go vote for Republicans in order to increase oil industry profits, right? That's not how they rolled. They went to branding and media exercises and found or invented, in many cases, issues that would mobilize these voters.
Let me state that another way. You've got your primary objectives. Get Americans addicted to oil. Push libertarianism. Wed all this together in a sort of theocracy. That stuff's hard to sell. So they decided to hide the primary objectives. Lay a bunch of social issues on top of them. The secondary objectives. Issues like abortion, integrated schools, concerns about second-wave feminism, resisting the gay and lesbian movement, fighting sex education, etc. Many of us only really ever see the secondary objectives. But if you dig just a little deeper, you'll see that outrage over the secondary objectives serves the primary ones. Big money wanted to win at all costs. In order to push their economic goals, they covered them with a sheen of moral outrage provided by the New Right. As one of the New Right guys said, we organize discontent. Making us discontent was the goal, so that we would back their objectives. One of the architects of this marriage of religion and far-right politics, as I mentioned, was Paul Weyrich, essentially the coordinating figure of the New Right. Again, a follower of R.J. Rushdoony.
Paul Weyrich wanted his vision of religion to dominate America. And he had a very rigid idea of social norms. And he was part of a group of people, and I would say mostly men, who just wanted to exert a form of social control and really saw democracy as the enemy, right? I mean, they said, we don't want everybody to vote. That's a bad thing to have everybody voting.
By the way, he really did say that. Here's an actor quoting Weyrich.
Many of our Christians have what I call the goo-goo syndrome. Good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They have never been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage goes up as the voting populace goes down.
Weyrich and the New Right didn't want all people to vote. They wanted their people to vote. As in the Southern Baptist Convention, they used the rules of the system to take over the system, bringing us back to the Constellation. You've got all these groups that these guys founded to advocate for all the ideas they've been defending, from libertarianism to fundamentalism to school segregation to business interests. What they decided to do was form an organization to coordinate their efforts. Thus was born their supergroup, the Council for National Policy.
So the Council for National Policy came together when people with the interests of the fossil fuel industries realized that they could work with the religious right and really attain all of their goals. But in order to do that, this is in 1981, they had to, over time, purge the moderates out of the Republican Party and replace them with extremists.
As they had with the Southern Baptist Convention. Use the system to take over the system. Okay, so they have a fancy group. So what? What is the Council for National Policy? What do they do?
What it does, the CNP, is hold 2 or 3 meetings a year, usually in luxury resorts. And you then pay thousands of dollars to attend, and you have to be recommended by a member. The membership is secret. The meetings are secret. The content of the meetings are secret. However, over time, there have been people who have leaked their membership rosters and, in some cases, videos of their program.
Despite the secrecy, a lot is known about the CNP, including its members. There's a reason I've waited this long in the season to do this episode, because I needed you to know who these people were and are before we got here. As impactful as their ministries were on their own, they're each just satellites circling the CNP. The first president of the Council for National Policy was Tim LaHaye. Other members include Jerry Falwell, Phyllis Schlafly, Pat Robertson, and Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
Tony Perkins, who is head of the Family Research Council, a core Council for National Policy organization.
Richard Land, the former president of the Southern Evangelical Seminary.
You have Mike Johnson, the current House Speaker, who's a Southern Baptist from Louisiana.
Richard Schaaf, former state secretary of the Indiana Ku Klux Klan, served on their executive committee. Grover Norquist, Kellyanne Conway, Justice Clarence Thomas's wife Ginny is a member. R.J. Rushdoony himself served on the Board of Governors. And of course, all the New Right guys, Weyrich, Blackwell, Vickery, Phillips, etc. Then there were the money people. Joseph Coors, the beer magnate who funded the Heritage Foundation. By the way, a strange bedfellow, right? Some of these guys were fundamentalists, and they were partnering with beer money? Then, of course, there was Nelson Bunker Hunt, but also the DeVos and Prince families.
The DeVos family, which Betsy DeVos belongs to, and her brother, Eric Prince, who's been involved in defense issues, are billionaires from the Amway fortune.
Amway being the world's largest multi-level marketing company. I've done a whole bunch of episodes on MLMs. You can find a collection of them on the website. Betsy DeVos is a member of the CNP. She served as Secretary of Education under the first Trump administration, which is on brand for President Trump. Put someone in charge of a department who wants to dismantle that department. She used her platform to advocate for school voucher programs, which should remind you of my Milton Friedman episodes. Her brother, Eric Prince, was the founder of a now rebranded mercenary firm called Blackwater. The company made headlines when they massacred civilians in Iraq in 2007. He's now working with the government of Haiti to kill gang members using drone strikes. The DeVos and Prince families are major funders of the CNP. But they're not the only billionaires in the club.
They have worked very closely with the Koch brothers.
The Koch brothers. I think in the Constellation, these guys are basically a gas giant, in that they're giants in the world of petroleum. Their father made his money setting up oil refineries in Stalin's Soviet Union. He was also a member of the John Birch Society. In other words, he was a fiercely anti-communist man who made his money at the center of world communism. His sons have gone on to fund the far right, though they are not the likeliest of partners. Yes, David Koch, because of his form of libertarianism, wanted to do away with corporate taxes. But also, some odd stuff that you wouldn't think would fit with the religious right, like advocating for same-sex marriage, as well as legalized prostitution. I mean, whatever, right? Money's money.
The Koch brothers organizations have funded hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of political activism advancing anti-climate, anti-environmental policies.
They brought this stuff with them into the Council for National Policy, as well as a tricky tactic, going after states like mine, Wyoming. Why? Because their ideas weren't that popular. It would be too difficult to win the majority of the country.
What they had to do was identify voters in districts that would allow them to exploit the odd nature of our political system. And under our system, states that have less population have proportionately more power. So Wyoming, as you well know, has what's the population?
I looked it up. In the 2020 census, we had just shy of 580,000 people, less than the total population of Indianapolis.
It's got 2 senators the same way New York and California do with their many millions.
By targeting a state like Wyoming, they only had to convince half of the state, just over 250,000 people, to get their kind of senators elected. And those senators could have as much power as any from a more populous state. By partnering with the CNP, the Koch brothers could share what they learned with others and push their agenda at its meetings. Small government, tax cuts for the rich, climate denial, and deregulation of their polluting industries. All in a package that looks vaguely Christian. Let's connect some dots between all these celestial objects.
The Council for National Policy receives financing from the donors. Richard DeVos always called CNP where the donors meet the doers.
So you get your money from people like the DeVosses and the Kochs. Those we know. But there are more.
And another important organization is the Bradley Foundation, based in Milwaukee,
who fund just so many things.
And then you have the National Christian Foundation,
which is a dark money fund, or donor-advised fund.
And that means that, say you're John Smith from Pittsburgh.
That's me.
And you want to put money into these causes but not have your name attached to it.
I don't want it to be traced back to me.
So you donate money to the National Christian Foundation, which sounds like a wonderful project. And then the National Christian Foundation makes the grants without the donors' names attached to them.
So the money goes to the causes I support without anybody knowing where it came from.
That's why it's called dark money, because it's hard to trace its origins. And one of the organizations that coordinates all of this is the Council for National Policy. Let's look up into the dark sky, where the money is. You see not only the bright lights, but also the space in between them, which up there is basically a void. For our constellation of organizations, the connection between them is not a void, but dark money. Let's see where some of it goes. See which stars are fueled this way. Oh, look over there. That's the Heritage Foundation. You've probably heard of them. They're a public policy organization that was started by the New Right. They're the people responsible for Project 2025, which you may have heard of. Essentially, Donald Trump's marching orders for his second term. Mass deportations, cutting abortion, warrantless surveillance, limit voting access, crack down on protesters, remove protections against discrimination. Project 2025. You can read it for yourself online.
If you look at the supporting organizations on the publication of the Project 2025, something like half of them are organizations that are represented in the Council for National Policy.
What other stars do we see? Oh, that one. That's Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America. an anti-abortion group.
You've got the Alliance Defending Freedom, which pursues anti-LGBTQ court cases.
Organizations connected to Focus on the Family and James Dobson.
You've got the National Rifle Association, the NRA. You've got the Federalist Society, which has been involved in promoting conservative judges.
The Federalist Society is one of those stars that seems far away, but has a huge gravitational pull. It was started in 1982 and promotes constitutional originalism. We'll get more in depth on that concept later this season, but it seeks to undo everything from Roe v. Wade to a right to privacy. George W. Bush and Donald Trump stacked the courts with its members. Of the 185 judicial nominees in Donald Trump's first term, all but 8 were from the Federalist Society. Oh, look over there! It's the American Center for Law and Justice, Pat Robertson's legal team that Robertson said
will be our answer to the destruction of our values by the humanists, the leftists, and the infamous ACLU.
There's really dozens and dozens of these organizations. And of course, after the book came out with the Trump administration, a lot of these organizations have been on the front pages ever since. So they've gone from working, behind the curtain to being very publicly identified. And also you have a lot of people who are members or connected with them who are being placed in high office and are executing elements of the Project 2025.
When we return, we'll see how members of the Council for National Policy leverage data to target specific voters. While you listen to the ads, why not leave a comment on your favorite podcasting app? It helps people find the show. A 5-star rating and a written review go a long way. And also, they're free. Okay, here come the ads. Welcome back. Today we're talking about the Council for National Policy. So we've been talking about big money, some of their objectives, a bunch of people involved. But how does a group like the CNP actually affect change? Remember the 3 things the New Right learned from the Goldwater campaign? Number 2 was
emphasize the recruitment and training of activists.
This is the job of the Leadership Institute, one of the organizations in the CNP's constellation, founded by one of the New Right guys, Morton Blackwell.
Saying that, we need a cadre of not just campaign managers and campaign staffers. We need to recruit candidates to run for office at every level, and we need to train them how to win. And they had an entire philosophy, which was, you don't need to be right.
Which, if you recall, is the first lesson Blackwell learned from the Goldwater campaign.
You can state something in public that is fallacious as long as you win.
And I'm just going to remind you that lying is repeatedly called out in the Bible as a sin.
The Leadership Institute is based in suburban Washington. They claim to have trained well over 200,000 political workers, communication people, speech writers, people running for office, campaign managers. It's highly specialized.
The Leadership Institute holds classes across the country, teaching folks to get involved. One graduate was the former Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Not only getting their people into positions of power, but also staffing polling places. This is especially disconcerting considering the way that the far right denied the 2020 election. A key task for CNP members is to control messaging. To do so, they have to bypass traditional media outlets who might fact-check them. One way they do that is through bulk mailings, using data mining to reach specific people they can sway. Another is by controlling a medium that is often overlooked: radio. With the decline of ad revenues in the 2000s, local newspapers closed all across the country.
So now you have lots of counties in the United States that have no professional news organization at all. And that vacuum has been filled partly by religious and right-wing talk radio stations where they say they're reporting news and it's just political propaganda. And there are no professional journalism standards whatsoever.
Stuart Epperson grew up in Virginia. He studied broadcasting at Bob Jones University, then went into business with his brother-in-law, Edward Atzinger III. They started their empire in 1973 in Southern California, targeting fundamentalist audiences in a hotbed for the John Birch Society. And they just kept growing, with more and more and more stations, naming their company Salem Radio. Epperson said that their goal was to counter secular humanism by creating
a platform for the best communicators to communicate biblical truth.
And didn't know exactly when they became members of the CNP. But by 2014, Epperson was the president, and Atzinger was on the board of governors. Salem was more immune to the decline of ad revenues than newspapers were, because less than half of their income comes from ads. The rest is made up by selling programming time to ministries that pay hefty fees to be on the airwaves. And they're not alone. Business is good for Bott Radio Network and American Family Radio, too. With newspapers diminishing, radio continues to be a place that the far right can thrive, especially on AM frequencies. In 2025, the National Religious Broadcasters Organization lobbied to have an AM radio included in every new car. In 2025. Who wants to listen to a staticky, lo-fi medium in an era of podcasting, FM, or satellite? Still, AM radio continues to be a power base for the far right. The religious right knew that the mainstream media was not going to highlight their concerns, so they formed their own media networks. And they thrived. In her book, Anne lays out some of the stats. American Family Radio.
Almost 200 stations in 35 states.
As of 2025, Salem had
115 stations with 11 million listeners.
Bott Radio controls
120 stations with a combined reach of 60 million people.
That's a huge audience. And all three networks, Bott, Salem, and American Family, are tied to the CNP. This is incredibly important because the purpose of the CNP is to coordinate efforts, to get specific language out into the world, to sound unified. If Station A says,
Obama's biggest mistake was the Affordable Care Act,
while radio station B says,
Obama's biggest mistake was making Hillary Clinton Secretary of State.
it's nowhere near as effective as if both of them are saying the same thing.
Obama's biggest mistake was the Affordable Care Act.
Because it sounds like everyone's in agreement about what they're saying. They are unified, often using the same wording in their arguments. This is important when it comes to things like denying the validity of the 2020 presidential election. At prwatch.org, you can view videos of the CNP coordinating language and strategy, trying to get the election decided by state legislators who they controlled, instead of leaving it to the voters if they didn't get their way. They planned their election denial 8 months before the election even took place, then carried it out by coordinating language among their members. I haven't yet told you where we're stargazing. Nick, where are we?
We're right next to where we used to live. Our house was over there. We lived there for 11 years, and then the roof was collapsing in, and they tore it down.
And it's just basically a parking lot now.
It is, yeah. They put a fence around it in memorial.
We have a lot of great memories in this neighborhood. And across the street, there's the ice rink where they play minor league hockey.
It's so fun. We used to go and dance there all the time between all the plays.
And there's a rock climbing wall. We hike up Snow King all the time. But right next door to where we used to live, across this fence that we're standing next to, is a building. How would you describe that building?
It's very fancy, very tidy, well put together. It's kind of a faux wood paneled siding. And it's 2 stories, very bright, very professional.
Nondescript, right on the corner of King and Snow King here in Jackson, Wyoming. It's an investment firm. And the man who built this was a major player in the Council for National Policy.
We used to be literal neighbors with these people.
Yeah. His name was Foster Friess, and he's had a big impact on the country and on American Christianity. And this, in 2016, is the site of a fundraiser where Foster Friess and his organization were raising money for the Trump campaign. In fact, Don Jr. stood right there.
And we were just on the other side of that fence. And right now we're on the sidewalk right out in front of the building.
We could hear the music playing, and there was a protest going on out here as people were protesting the Trump campaign. Friess is an interesting figure and you're not likely to know who he is unless you watch vintage Fox News clips. He had a sort of a libertarian view on taxation, as captured in this New York Times article from February 16th, 2012.
People don't realize how wealthy people self-tax. Mr. Freese's point is that the common good is better served when the wealthy self-tax by supporting charities of their own selection, rather than paying taxes to finance government spending. I think we should get rid of taxes as much as we can, Mr. Freese told me, because you get to decide how you spend your money rather than the government. I mean, if you have a certain cause, an art museum or a symphony, and you want to support it, it would be nice if you had the choice to support it. It's a question. Do you believe that the government should be taking your money and spending it for you? Or do you want to spend it for you? Mr. Freese explained.
He made a great deal of money. He ran for the Senate in Wyoming and lost. He was a longtime member of the Council for National Policy and a key member,
serving as the president of the CNP from 1997 to 1998. He also funded CNP member the Family Research Council, as well as traditional charities, but also another bright star in the constellation.
And one of the more interesting activities that he was involved in was putting up the money to help found Turning Point USA with Charlie Kirk.
In 2012, at the Republican National Convention, an 18-year-old community college dropout named Charlie Kirk approached Foster Freese. He wanted to start an organization that could leverage social and conservative media, equipped with the CNP's networking abilities. They created shareable graphics marketed under conservativememes.org, which were shared by Russian agents. According to Ann, Turning Point USA leverages college students to push standards of political correctness on campus.
And that has turned into a big, aggressive organization. Last time I looked, I think they had a budget of something like $80 million and hundreds of staff people. And he was a very effective organizer, and he worked hand in glove with the Leadership Institute. Leadership Institute, I believe, really helped form his organization and co-sponsored websites to train people to disrupt school boards and so on.
In 2017, journalist Jane Mayer reported about their actions on campuses. Turning Point USA nurtured a sense that conservatives are the real minority in colleges. They actively participate in Republican politics, despite that being against their 501c3 status. And yes, it is funded by fossil fuel interests. They even distributed a pamphlet called 10 Ways Fossil Fuels Improve Our Daily Lives. One of their goals is to take over student government positions and prevent schools from divesting in controversial companies, like oil and gas interests. Once in control, they bring in speakers pushing
American exceptionalism and free market ideals on campus.
Psst, this is all about money and economics. Charlie Kirk, no surprise, was a member of the Council for National Policy. I want to take a second here before we transition to the next topic. I know this is a lot. I felt really convicted that this show can't be about shock or getting you to clutch your pearls, or give us permission to laugh at those extremists. The people we're talking about are our brothers and sisters, our parents, our neighbors, in my case, literally our neighbors. They're not our enemies. The temptation is to split, to leave them behind, call them names, to gawk or feel self-righteous. We can't do that. If you're not driving or doing something dangerous, would you join me in prayer? Lord, we pray that you would unify your church around the gospel, not big money, not self-righteousness, identity, anger, or a sense of shared persecution. We repent of the times we've been distracted. Take each and every person here and give us a chance to bless someone in one of these groups. Lord, we want to pray for the Freese family, the DeVosses, the Princes, the Kochs, and the oil barons. Not for their ill, but that you would equip them to see you today, that you would speak to them and to us about your truth and make it clear. Amen. Let's just take a moment of silence for whatever it needs to be. So the CNP coordinates groups that act on campuses, radio messaging, and training seminars. They are deeply tied to big industry, multi-level marketing, and oil interests. In order to really get their agendas enacted, they need to control voters. Remember those 3 things that the new right learned from the Goldwater campaign? Dispense with the need to be right, train leaders, and
make sure political technology is integrated in the organization framework.
Political technology. This is key. But first, we need to go back to 2008.
You had the Obama campaign as an early adopter of digital technology in that campaign. And the Republicans were very chagrined by this and were also horrified by the idea of Obama as president. I mean, he was their worst nightmare. So the Koch brothers in 2010 put up a large amount of money, $50 million, to found i360.
It is essentially about data mining.
Now, the records of who voted and what party they were registered and all of this, and combine it with consumer data and data from many other sources and create profiles of every single voter in the United States. They could just combine everything that they could find out about you, which was quite a lot. And so then they took that data and made it available to their chosen Republican candidates. Not every Republican candidate, just the ones that they favored, so that their canvasser could go to do their door knocking and know everything about the person they were talking to before they opened the door.
Using consumer data and input from volunteers to peg you exactly. Time magazine reported that they know if you have a flag on your porch, if you own cats, what car you drive, when you voted. Far-right canvassers can access specific data about a particular household whose door they're about to knock on. And the app can go so far as to suggest a line of discussion.
If you're a Catholic housewife with 6 kids, you talk abortion. If you're a guy with a lot of guns who had a home invasion last year, you talk NRA. Church directories are being acquired and mined very aggressively and combined with Republican data, not just conservative right-wing evangelical fundamentalist churches, lots of churches who don't know that this is happening.
That is not an exaggeration. As you know, my brother works as a church secretary. I asked him about this phenomenon. Nick, we're back outside. We're under the stars, standing on the sidewalk. I wanted to ask you, have you ever had people call the church and ask for the church directory?
Yeah, we have. And we've also had people send emails with convincing, nonchalant names. Like they'll just put their name like Susie Jacobson or something like that, and but no reference to the fact that they were with a company or anything like that. But when you check the email address, you notice like it's from a business or an organization, but they don't let on to that. And they don't present that when they call too. They just want us to email them a digital copy of the church directory.
So they're asking specifically for a digital version?
That's right.
Wow. And what do these emails look like?
Usually very short. There's no footer or anything in there. It's just like 1 or 2 sentences. Hey, I've been trying to log onto the online portal for the directory. Can you give me a login? Well, we don't have one, and that's on purpose. Yeah. Because we don't want people to be able to log on, but that people are fishing for that, or they'll say, hey, can you send me a PDF of the church directory? Oh. And we just don't do that unless I know who they are. But
you could see how somebody could easily fall for that.
Super easy, especially in a larger church. Thankfully, we're a smaller church, so it's harder to get past me, the gatekeeper, and I'm the only one who knows how to get to it.
Yeah, but especially if somebody didn't understand technology and how phishing works, that would be an easy scam.
Or you could just say, what's the harm?
Do they ever call?
Yeah, we've had people call before too. And usually we just take a message or something like that. They don't tend to call back, which is one of those things, but we'll take it and like get your phone number and everything, try to look them up and see if it's somebody we know.
It's spooky, right? There are organizations out there hunting for church records. And unsuspecting church members, staff, or elders could be feeding this information into their systems. All of this data is used just as the New Right guys leveraged it, to get hyper-specific. Only now it's unimaginably detailed. The goal is to target people who may be on the fence or who haven't voted in previous elections and turn them toward their team. As was widely reported, in 2024, more people didn't vote at all than voted for either presidential candidate. If the CNP can move that needle even a little, it can dramatically change the outcome of an election. Even with all this technology in place and all this money, these powerful people don't always get what they want. In 2016, Ted Cruz was the golden child chosen by the Council for National Policy. But against the predictions of many, an upset occurred.
Well, Ted Cruz did not win the primaries. Donald Trump did. So the movement had to face the prospect of Hillary or nothing. So this was when a lot of the people involved with the Council for National Policy organized the meeting in Times Square.
Longtime listeners might remember this meeting. It's where CNP members tried to sell Donald Trump to Christians. This is the get-together I cited in Season 1, where James Dobson announced that Donald Trump was a baby Christian, and then lied and said that he hadn't said it. He did.
And these were Christians who said Donald Trump has not led a very Christian life. He's been a womanizer. He's been a sexual abuser. He's been dishonest in his business practices. He's not really our guy. And that was where the whole idea that he could be an instrument of the movement was promoted. So the message was, yeah, he may not act like a Christian or even be a Christian, but he can serve our ends.
The CNP's full support of Donald Trump didn't stop there. And as early as February 2020, months before the election, the CNP organized language around COVID denial. They aided in the denial of the results of the 2020 election. When President Trump got on the phone with Georgia's top election official, Brad Raffensperger, and asked them to find 11,780 votes, Cleta Mitchell, one of his lawyers, was on the call too. She's also a member of the CNP. Then there were the domestic terrorist attacks on the Capitol on January 6th, 2021.
Ginny Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, put out supporting tweets in the lead up. She's a very active member of the Council for National Policy. So she was recruiting for it. Charlie Kirk, who's a member of the CNP, tweeted that he was sending buses of people to participate. So there was quite a lot of signs beforehand that they were involved in pushing an event. And then on the day of the event, Jenny Beth Martin from Tea Party Patriots, another leading member of the CNP, was scheduled to speak in a very prominent position. Simone Gold, the doctor who was their point person for COVID disinformation, was arrested for her participation in breaking into the Capitol. So as my book and as my article in the Washington Spectator, which is online for free, point out, they were all over it.
I generally haven't gotten into the present with this season, because the topic is supposed to be about the 1970s and 80s. But hopefully you can see that the actions of the religious right, Tim LaHaye, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, Bill Bright, and especially the new right, were not innocuous. They haven't gone away. Instead, they've reached their logical extremes through an organization they founded. You can draw a straight line from them to the MAGA movement. I think that one of the things that people are going to say about this episode is like, well, the left has big money and the left coordinates its responses to things. How would you respond to that when somebody tries to throw it back to the left? Well, the left does this, because one of the phrases that I think I've read in your book, and maybe I'm just summarizing it, is that the left innovates and the right perfects. The right is always kind of reacting. How would you respond to somebody saying something like that?
I think we also get into a mess when we talk about the left, because when you talk about certain basic policies that people are trying to defend, like health care for children, I mean, if you want to call Dwight Eisenhower a wild-eyed leftist, okay, but that's not the world I grew up in.
Eisenhower was a Republican.
If you want to say that there should be laws in place to protect consumers from fraud, is that leftist?
No. Much of that boom took place under the Nixon administration. Again, a Republican, as did the crackdowns on segregation academies. The GOP was the first to adopt the ERA, until it abandoned it with Reagan. Nixon championed the Clean Water and Clean Air Acts, founded the EPA. It's just too simple to say this is about Democrats and Republicans. This is about what the far right wants and what they're willing to do to get it.
And I think partly its failure of vocabulary and imagination has led to these very mainstream ideas, very American ideas, being branded as leftist and Marxist and I don't know what. And as I said, it would be very surprising to our conservative grandparents who, thought that they were just part of normal life.
Why? Who does it benefit? Why all this noise, the fear-mongering, the discontent? In Anne's opinion, it benefits a handful of millionaires and billionaires so they don't have to pay taxes, so that oil and industry concerns aren't hampered by regulation, achieving the primary objectives by distracting us with secondary ones, at the cost of us forfeiting our Christian witness to the world.
I do think that we're facing a moment in the country where the grown-ups need to wake up and not be so quiet, not just sit by while these horrible things are being done in our name. I do feel fairly motivated by my faith and growing up believing that we were taught to care about other people. Again, not to be vicious, not to be cruel, not to be greedy, not to be dishonest, not to, the Ten Commandments hold up pretty well if you actually read them. I guess my problem is, all these people running around themselves talking about Christian values who apparently never did.
Special thanks to Ann Nelson. Her excellent book is Shadow Network. I recommend getting a newer copy so that you can get the updated coverage of the January 6th insurrection. Keep her in your prayers. I can't imagine what it's like to live with this material. It has to be a burden. I used many sources on this episode. I'll list them in your show notes and on the website at trucepodcast.com. Thanks also to the Teton County Library for providing access to newspaper archives. Can we all just celebrate libraries and how great they are? My gratitude also goes out to my brother Nick, who helped me talk through all of this as well. We put in hours of work trying to come up with a way to frame this episode. He's a good dude. As always, I'm indebted to my friends who gave me their voices for this episode, including Josh Griffith, Chris Sloan, Kenneth Forte, and Bob Stevenson. This is usually the point where I have a fundraising pitch, but I'm not going to do that today. You know how to find me if you want to help. Instead, I want to encourage you to do something for your pastor, Sunday school teacher, elder, or whoever is doing the work of the gospel, because it's not easy to do their jobs in this political world, and they need to know that you care about them. Maybe take them a gift or drop by with some flowers. And thanks to everyone who's investing in their communities, the people around them, and sharing the love of Jesus. Truce is a production of Truce Media, LLC. God willing, we'll talk again soon. I'm Chris Starrin, and this is Truce.